Well, that was quite an adventure. That was already quite a lot happened in our pre-recording phase.
Foreplay's always, not always, sometimes better than the act.
Foreplay. More play. I like that term for it. I also really like the term, although I rarely hear anybody use it, outer course.
Love that.
Outer course. So good.
Sex positive culture.
It's my body to give.
Are threesome gifts a thing?
Taking a bath.
I like your bed.
Horizontal.
Horizontal.
This is Horizontal with Lila.
I'm Lila, and I am horizontal in sunny Miami, Florida.
And I'm Annie Lala, and I'm horizontal in my home on the beach with a lovely goddess beside me. And I'm very excited to unfurl.
I love sleepovers, spooning, sharing, sex, storytelling, and stargazing, among other things. So I metaphorically rolled them all up in audio form and called it a podcast. Horizontal with Lila is slow radio. It's intimacies of all kinds. It's us lying down, wearing robes, sharing secrets in your ears. Each session with a guest is between 2 and 3 hours long and divided into 2 episodes. Part 1s are available anywhere you get your podcasts, and Part 2s are available only to patrons of the Horizontal Arts. Go to patreon.com/horizontal with Lila, patreon.com/horizontal with Lila, and become a patron of $5 and up per month, because when I launch Season 3, I'll be revealing a couple of surprises and revamping my Patreon tiers. If you're already in as a patron, you'll be grandfathered in with access to all the episodes. So, fair warning, lovers. This Thursday night in Brooklyn, come Valentine's with us. Valentine's Day is in less than a week, and I would usually be fretting about what to do. This was especially true if I was single, but it was also very much true when I was part of a couple. What could I do that wouldn't have me feeling lonely? How could I turn this day of forced romance and commerce and couples privilege into a day that would actually be nourishing for me? I tried dating myself on Valentine's. I tried friend time. I tried tango festivals. I tried Galentine's Day. But what I actually desired was an intimate, pleasure-focused experience for myself. I desired sensation play, delicious treats that were safe for me to eat, titillating performance, immersive theater, and one-on-one connection. I really wanted to make Valentine's Day about delighting all of my senses, not about the arbitrary fact of whether I was romantically linked to another person on that day. So, I'm curating it. It's called 14 Rooms, and it will be on Valentine's night. It's an event for everyone, whether you're not in a relationship, in a polycule, in a situationship, no matter what our quote-unquote status is, we can gather and explore intimate moments of different kinds, together, as a community celebrating pleasure, our senses, and our aliveness, celebrating big love. All of the details are on horizontalwithlila.com. Come Valentine's with us. It will be delicious. It's the Valentines I've always wanted. Apropos of everything, in this episode I lie down with Annie Lala, goddess of love and world-class relationship coach. In this first part of our conversation, we talk about the correlation between self-esteem and soulmates, how couples cross-train each other, footnoting our parents for the superpowers we have born on the back of their crazy, optimizing for aliveness rather than happiness, empathy algorithms, integration and differentiation, the inhales and exhales of relationshipping, the phrase, "I'm angry, but I love you more than I'm angry," and using your creativity to adjust your emotional response to your reality. Annie stands for true love. She is a gladiator of empathy. I first met Annie when she gave a talk about true love in the speaker series I co-led at Burning Man in 2018. The theme was the year of the robot, and we had, shall we say, technical difficulties. The mic was down, so somebody found Annie a little toy bullhorn, and we all gathered round her like children at story time to press our burning questions into her hands like love letters. She's one of the most poignant extemporaneous speakers that I've ever witnessed on stage. I took copious notes because I'd literally never heard anybody speak about love the way that Annie does. These are some of the words I captured. Cartographer of love. Kilojoules of energy. There's an I that has to be sacrificed on the altar of us. If you're not feeling terror, you're not actually playing the game. The sacred mirror, and nothing compares to the gymnasium, to the dojo of a true love relationship. I imagine by now you know how I feel about words. I savored Annie's words. I tasted them. I wrote them down in red ink. I mouthed them to myself and fervently hoped that she would get horizontal with me someday. The time wasn't quite right at Burning Man. But when I booked my ticket to Miami, taking a loving risk to go meet a man I'd been communicating with for 4 months but had never met in person, a risk I imagined that Annie would approve of mightily, and I found out that Annie was in Miami? Wow. Come lie down with us on a big white bed with a view of the ocean in Miami, Florida. I love that word. I love that you used that word when we spoke last night about doing this. That is what I'm attempting. The magic trick I attempt is to unfurl ourselves, knowing that it will be shared.
Yeah, I think of a fern or I think of a rosebud, and how the final bloom of the rosebud or the fern is contained within the bud. It's already there. The future's latent in the present, and all is happening is that it's unfurling. And I think unfurling has a pace that's organic, and it's our job as lovers and as friends and as teachers and coaches to tune into the pace of another human's unfurling, honor it, and not push it or pull it, but allow it to do its thing in its own time.
I like this thought of the genetic promise of the relationship being inherent at the beginning.
Absolutely. And this is why, a lot of the clients I work with who are done with dating and ready to find their soulmate, the first thing I try to help them see is that the caliber of partner they attract is directly related to the level of their own self-esteem. And so the higher their self-esteem, the higher quality mate they'll attract. So that's basically what I work on with my clients, is generating mechanisms, algorithms, technologies, and exercises to increase their self-esteem and to have it be generative, not something they have to babysit all the time, something that runs on autopilot in the background. And again, self-esteem is not just how much strut you have as you walk down the street. Nathaniel Branden, who literally wrote the book on self-esteem, defines self-esteem in 2 parts. The first is having deep trust in your future self's ability to handle what life throws at it. And the second is feeling like you deserve to be happy. And if you have those 2 developed, then you can really enter reality with a level of confidence and trust in your ability to handle what comes and in the right for you to enjoy your life. And that pleasure is a necessary part of your existence and one you won't compromise on.
I think about that, the self-esteem being the barometer for what you're able to attract. And there's a piece of it that when I hear that, I feel sad because of how mightily I've struggled with my own self-esteem throughout my life up until quite recently, and, still occasionally on my worst days, of course. And I know that a lot of people are laboring under this idea that is heavily sewed around that nobody can really love you until you love yourself. And I imagine people feeling depressed when they hear that.
Yeah.
Like, oh, nobody's going to love me because this is so hard to raise my self-esteem.
Yeah.
And I don't want people to be discouraged. When I was an actress,
Yeah.
there is inside out mechanisms to delving into a character or a play or a world, and there are outside in mechanisms. And I've often had to rely in my life on outside in mechanisms, which is why I wear fantastical things and bright colors and outlandish hats. And, I'm working on myself from the outside in so that I
Can
puff
generate.
up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, they call it internal reference and external reference is a term for it. Most people tend to polarize into these two groups, which are internal reference and external reference. And most in couples, usually one of each comes together to cross train. Because if you're
Whoa.
fully, yeah.
Wait, let me take a second with that. I just saw it in a huge flash. The really confident men that I have been with, some of them, with the really happy childhoods, who just have it from the inside, and then me, who's worked on it mostly. Mostly, is that true? No, that's not kind enough to myself or true. I have done work both ways towards the center.
But it's easier for some people to go in one direction over another.
Yes.
And they both have a shadow. So very internally referenced people who only believe what they believe. And 40 people could be telling them there's some piece of reality that's not true, and they will argue against it. At its worst, they end up in an insane asylum. They're crazy because they have a reality that no one else buys into. No consensus reality agrees with them. The shadow of external reference is that you're always eternally contingent on external opinions and points of view in terms of your value, your beauty, your intelligence. But like everything has a shadow, what we want is a cross-train. You want to develop a character that has a sufficient internal reference that you can hold your autonomous point of view, stand for something, be a pioneer, have a dharmic imperative and follow it. But you also want to be externally referenced so that you're listening to what your community is saying, you're tuned into the rest of humanity, and you're not on some rogue trip,
sociopath.
basically.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And, sociopath is part of the anti-social disorder, which means they don't fit into the mainstream culture. And, as much as they may get ahead in the world, the internal experience of a sociopath is deeply lonely and never connected. And I think, the quality of their internal life is not one that I would aspire towards.
Oh, God, no. And I can recognize it, too, even when I see someone who has trappings that look like great plumage. And I feel into them and I think, oh, no, I don't want that feeling. I don't want what I imagine that feels like on the inside. I prefer this journey, thank you.
Yeah, but just that statement right there. I prefer this journey. I don't know how you arrived at that place, but that is a triumph. To look across reality and see all the different ways people could feel inside their being, and to look at them all and go, you know what? I choose mine. I take this set of problems that I'm struggling with. And I think that is an accomplishment of self-esteem. That means that you wouldn't trade your life in for someone else's. And not everybody feels that way, and that's part of the work I do is to help them to get there.
I can see how the suffering as a child, the deep loneliness and resentment at not having a family that I wanted to be a part of, and feeling there was nobody to play with me on holidays when everybody was with their people, their right, true people. And my mother's illness when I was 7, 8, and 9 of colon cancer, and her being absent and in the hospital, and her subsequent manic depression, which has endured. And my grappling with her, and grappling is a good word for it because it's a fraught mother-daughter relationship that is only now beginning to improve. Actually, it started to improve after last year when I went for Thanksgiving and found myself in a place where I told her I didn't feel love for her.
That's interesting. So the relationship started to change when you realized, which is something I like to help my clients learn, when you realize that the only way this relationship is going to go further is if you take leadership role and you actually take responsibility for moving it in a new direction, because your mother's maxed out in terms of her consciousness. But you are, if she's done any good job, by the time you've hit 30, mid-20s, 30, you should have gone beyond your parents in terms of intelligence and consciousness. And so
Growth.
now you're the leader of the intimacy, of the dynamic. And so I'm really proud that you took that step, and it sounds like it's proved useful.
It's better than it's ever been.
Yeah.
And it really changed because I was feeling just that any interaction I had with her was out of obligation. And I felt there was a guilt I was carrying, and she co-created a lot of guilt with me. And I was carrying it, and I was just placating her. I would talk to her on FaceTime once a week at a certain time because I knew that it, as a good codependent person, I knew that would put her at ease and that she would feel less nervous and less comfortable, and she would get this scrap of my attention that I really didn't want to give. And after I told her that I didn't feel love for her and then left her house, I was on the tail end of this cross-country road trip while I was recording. And I was like, I have to go. I just need to go. And I left, and I finished the rest of the trip, which was another week or so. And I talked to her afterwards, and she said something that really shocked me. She said, "It hurts, of course, but I understand, and I don't blame you." And I didn't expect that she would be able to offer that, to not blame me for not feeling love for her. I really expected blame. So to have her say that she didn't, I think, released some of the pressure valve of the guilt that I had been carrying. And I stopped saying I love you as a rote way to end a conversation. And I stopped talking to her at the appointed time of, Fridays at 4:30. And I gave myself the space to not try to make her okay.
Yeah.
She's not okay. She hasn't been okay. And she's the loneliest person I know. And I know a lot of lonely people. And in a huge way, I can see how having her as a guide through my life has been an extreme PhD in empathy.
Yeah, and that's the hidden gift that you probably make use of in your life.
It is everything to what I am doing. And I can look at it also if I'm thinking of my why, and I can see she's so lonely, and I want to fight loneliness as an adversary. I want to unlock secrets that allow people to step into nourishing connection and interaction. And I also told her in that conversation, I could feel just how awful it was to be saying these things. And I felt like I had to.
They're true.
I said, I don't want to end up like you. I'm so sorry for you. And she's like, that's awful. That's awful for you to have to feel sorry for me. I don't want that, and it's going to get better. And, I'll try. As many manic depressive people, she has also a great joy for life sometimes, and loves to dance, loves to ballroom dance, and knows she needs to do these things. I talked to her on the phone the other day, and she said that her therapist said she has to go back to dancing, because she used to come into her therapist's office and show her pictures and bring her gifts, and she had a joie de vivre. And her therapist said, I haven't seen you do that in months and months and months. It's just, she has to dance. Like it's a prescription.
Her life depends on it. Her
life
aliveness depends on it.
Literally. And she knows, but she will, every time I spoke to her, she'd be like, I know I need to do this. I just can't bring myself to do it.
I mean, we all suffer with some version of that, the thing that we know would enliven us.
That we don't do, or that we don't do enough of, or...
But I really want to acknowledge your courage in, or maybe the desperation in having to express what was real for you. And I want to point out that even though that was super hard and painful and probably trespassed all kinds of secret contracts you had with your mom, that audacious move was the turning point, is the inflection point in the relationship changing with your mother. And on the other side of it, something new is possible for both of you. And it took your courage and your leadership to do that. And what I'm really touched by with your mom is underneath all her pain and her obligation and her guilt is this piece of her that loves you enough to care that it's hard for you, to get that this was painful. And you, in that little gap, you got to see that her love like sort of leak through.
Actually feel her love, not just her being like, oh, I love you so much. You know, you're my only person, basically.
Like feel benevolence. Feel her literally emotional willingness to go into your experience.
Her genuinely unconditional love, right? Like this person who you produced and gave life is telling you that they don't feel love for you. And you say, it's okay, I still love you. And I thought, this is either going to kill her and she's going to die and I'm going to have that in me. I'm going to live with that. Or something's going to change. That was a year ago. Oh, no, over a year ago. I didn't go down to see her until her birthday in November. But it was better. And there were moments that I loved her. And I could actually feel like a genuine sense of like this human I was at my favorite tea shop. I was talking to the manager and he just started listening to the podcast and he listened to an episode in which I spoke about that encounter, that Thanksgiving encounter. And he said, I wonder, he's like, are you open to this, any feedback? And I said, yes. And he said, I wonder if you know very well the ways in which she was wrong for you. And I wonder if there's a place for you now to consider all the ways in which she was right for you. There's no way I would have access to the kind of empathy that I do without something like that, some kind of trauma or something like that.
It's like on the back of her particular brand of crazy. Yeah. You got to build these muscles, these superpowers that not only serve you, but make you a leader in the world around this particular domain. And even though you can't directly footnote it to my mother taught me this, it is still because of her that you have developed it. And so the way I look at it is, can we footnote our parents for being a participant in our superpowers that were built on the back of their crazy?
Yes.
And give them the props in our mind. And every time I'm empathic, I footnote my mom's lack of empathy. And I kind of thank her. I go, Mom, thank you. And it sucked when I was 4. And it sucked not having you care. But I really love my life and my ability to care for people now. And I wouldn't have had it without you. And so I'm still going to give you props. And it's a way to, I call it footnoting. And it's one of the practices I give my clients, where I get them to list out and footnote things in their life that they wouldn't have or be or think or do if it hadn't have been for their parents. And to write them down. And then the next time they see their parents, just tell them one. I love reading books. I mean, I worship books. They're all over my house. When my father would find books on a street in a different language, he would pick them up like sacred objects and bring them home. Because books held knowledge. And I learned a respect and a deep appreciation for reading and books, and so does my husband. And I love that part of me, and I wouldn't have had it without my father. I talk to strangers in elevators, only because my mother does. There's a lot of things she didn't do, but she liked talking to strangers. And so every time I talk to strangers, I footnote my mom in real time in the corner of my mind. Mom, thanks. I'm really enjoying myself talking to strangers. And so I think if we can build the practice of in real time footnoting the parts of our reality and ourself and our being that came from our parents, what we build is a sense of history. Every single cell in our body is linked, 2 little pieces of mom and dad, intertwined ad infinitum in every cell. And if you can think of your parents as, I literally see my mom as sitting on my left shoulder and my dad is sitting on my right shoulder. And everywhere I go in reality, they're informing and influencing how I show up. And when it's in a way that I love, I just wink at them on each side. Like, thanks. You are my history. And I'm the cutting edge avatar of the family lineage. And I'm standing on their shoulders. Good, bad, or indifferent. They've contributed to who I am. And if you can find a way to love this moment, even in its pain and its despair, by attending to its aliveness. I don't optimize for happiness anymore. The opposite of dead is not happy, it's alive. So when I'm crying, when I'm sobbing, when I'm angry, I'm alive.
Alive, very much.
And I'm alive because of them, literally, metaphorically, and,
Spiritually, perhaps.
And so, learning to honor your parents for your own aliveness it's a skill, and it adds to your self-esteem. It's one of the first ways to develop your self-esteem.
I love the idea of sending up that thanks. And that's how I visualize it as you're talking about it. You're talking about it on your shoulders, but I see it up.
Yeah.
I see just like sending up that,
It's like a royalty.
Thanks for that love of the theater. Yeah. Without that, I never would have trained. I never would have.
And who'd you get that from?
My mother.
Excellent.
I also got my love of color. Although I had wearing blackface, right, to rebel against it. I had a little, almost goth phase in high school, But like my love of color, my love of vibrance, my ability to talk to anybody that I want to or choose to talk to.
And these are all things that your mother created reference experiences for you? Mm-hmm. Does she know that?
I should tell her. She probably knows, but not
From
necessarily because I said it.
Yeah. And what I've noticed with parents, at this point in their life, you think of them as someone who are your elders and your authorities and the ones you look up to, but on some level, they've actually reduced to like teenagers.
Yes.
That are looking for us for approval.
Yes.
And so what I've
so
noticed.
Much. She always asks me if she looks pretty and if what she's wearing is nice. And most of the time, it's really not. But I just tell her that it is anyway, because what harm does it do?
Well, they're like needy teenagers that need approval because you're
Yes.
the high status person now. You're not older, but you're higher status.
Yeah.
In every way, status can be discerned. And so what I do is I try not to lie. I try to make authentic transparencies about what I actually do appreciate.
Right.
So like love of the theater, love of color. Those you can say triumphantly without even a reservation.
That's a beautiful blue or...
just, today
I did tell her hairstyle over FaceTime. Looked. I was like, I like your hair straighter. That looks very nice. She's like, oh yes, I got it done. I like it more curly. And I said, okay, that looks great right now.
But also letting her know like something that amazing that happened in your life that you love.
Yeah.
Or even if you're wearing a beautiful shirt in the middle of the phone call. I'm wearing this amazing colorful shirt, Mom. And I just want you to know, I only picked it because I love color. And I love color because you showed me how.
Yeah.
Thank you. And it's such a big part of my life. When you can footnote things you're proud about in yourself to your mother so that she can get the props without it stealing from your own. Mm-hmm. I literally think of our parents as hands, and we're the gloves that they're wearing. And they're shaping reality through us. And so I like to give them the credit because I don't need it. So let them have it. So I'll tell them about my triumphs. Mom, I got this podcast. I got this interview.
Yeah.
I got to be on this show and talk to this person. And you know what? The reason I was able to do this is because of A, B, C. And A and B I learned from you. So I leak back the credit to her so that she can feel it. And it doesn't cost me anything.
I have never listed all the ways in which my mother was the right mother for me. So it's time for that. And those are pieces of it. The color, the fabulosity, the ability to, the charisma. the charisma, the ability to go in and say hello.
And it's such a big part of you. It's such a signature.
Hugely.
I have a really weird woo-woo frame that gives me power when I think of parents and I work with clients. And I'm going to just warn you, it's woo-woo. It's not
Okay.
true. It's a metaphor.
Okay.
But I have this like fantasy that right before you're born, the universe sits with you and says, okay, new entity, you're going to be born in the human form. What superpowers do you want as you reign on planet Earth? And then you say, this is the superpower I want. Empathy, fabulosity, charisma, whatever.
Right.
And then they say, all right, in order to achieve that, we're going to have you born to these two parents who are going to produce a particular shape of wound in you, on the back of which will produce this set of superpowers that you want. And we'll do it with the minimum amount of pain, but we can't avoid the pain because you can only develop these superpowers on the back of conflict and drama.
Absolutely.
And so there you go. You're going to be born to these parents and you choose basically your parents based on the superpowers you want to develop. And they're the best way you could have got them. And so when you own that you chose your parents in order to develop these skills, it shifts the grumble from what the fuck and why did they do this to,
How
all
could
right,
they?
this is the Mount Everest I needed to get the feeling you need on the top. You can't get there without Everest. And I chose this Everest.
The man who got me pregnant, Peter, he, in the midst of our recent version of our love affair, in fact, basically right before he got me pregnant.
I love how you keep saying he got me pregnant.
Yeah, right.
How about
Good point.
How about this child
Good point. Right
tried
before,
to come through us?
right before there was a potential human growing inside me.
And you both did it. It wasn't just him.
Absolutely.
We got ourselves pregnant.
Clearly, I am still resentful of the way that he didn't show up for me.
Ah, so there's pain.
Yes.
That's what I was sensing.
Oh, there's a lot of resentment still that is not cleared.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of it has to do with the way that we did that together, but I went through it alone.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And he was out of town for the abortion. And he called me the next day, and then we didn't speak until I reached out to him 6 weeks later. And knowing that he has an ex-wife who had an abortion, knowing that he has been in that position before, I can't imagine how he would choose not to show up for me even as a friend after that experience. So I am still just very resentful.
Yeah.
And he sent me a message the other day inviting me to his screenplay reading. And I was like, fuck you!
Wow.
Fuck you. Are you fucking kidding?
Well, that's an indicator. He probably is literally so misattuned to what you were going through, what was needed from him. Not that it forgives him at all, but there is some like lack of, basically a lack of consciousness that's missing. What I'm curious about in your dalliance with him, was there indications of this kind of lack of consciousness, this kind of...
I know that he is not where I am, and he knows that. And he, in our most recent conversation in which I offered him to be my lover, and the only thing I asked was, that's not true, the only thing I asked, I wanted to see him once a week.
This is after the abortion?
Yes.
You were actually open to being reconnected with him romantically?
Yes.
What was driving that?
I love him.
Ah.
But he is not my man. And when you said the wounds earlier, you said that when the fuck is really hot,
Yes.
it's the wounds fucking. I think
Yes.
that's the case with this man. And also it's a long story in which I had wanted him to be my sexual debut in college, and he wouldn't because he was technically my boss at this work study thing, and so this is 17 years later, you know, that it's also the loss of this epic love story that I thought we were playing out.
So it's loss of a narrative.
Narrative.
But the reality didn't match the narrative.
He does not match me, definitely, in consciousness. And the thing that I was going to speak to was how in the midst of when we were actually romancing, when we were actually engaging sexually and engaging physically, and I was bringing him to, like, he had never been touched softly before. So I was touching his back. He's like, what, what is that? And I said, what do you mean? What is that? And he said, there's like crazy chills going up and down my spine. I've never felt this before. Nobody's ever touched me this way. And I said, nobody's ever touched you softly before? And he said, no. I said, what about your wife of 7 years? And he said, no, it was always touch me. From her, touch me. So I know that I'm in a very different place of thinking about and feeling into romance than he is. And in the midst of that, he went to see his therapist, and he came back and, told me this in bed one day. He said, I was talking to my therapist, and I asked him, because part of this story is that his wife turned out to be a lesbian, and he was devastated, and he writes heartbreak music about it. Do you think that you can develop empathy without pain? And his therapist just laughed. So that leads me to believe that he is only just now learning empathy. Mm-hmm. So he is in a light years different.
Yeah, he's in kindergarten and you're doing your PhD.
Yes.
In empathy. And this is every couple, I notice, the conflicts come from the delta between the empathy savvy of each partner. People like to think of polarity as feminine and masculine. I like to just take gender out. It's actually a polarity between empathy. Most couples that are successful have one person that is good at meing and one person that is good at weing. And they constellate together because on some deep level, they know they only have half the picture and they need to cross-train. The me person tends to be masculine, but doesn't have to be. The we person tends to be feminine, but doesn't have to be. And so when they meet together, the we person is PhDs in empathy. All they do is run algorithms about how what they're going to say is going to impact the other person. That's why it's so hard for them to be self-expressed, express their needs, say no.
Yeah, it's a recipe for codependency.
Well, honestly, I'm going to be straight up and say something really kind of edgy. I think every relationship starts codependent. And then it's your job, if you're in love, which is why I fight so much for this, for true love or bust. If you're in love, you fight your way through the codependency to cross-train each other so that the person who is over-empathic and abdicating on their own needs and wants learns to generate a core identity and an autonomy and a sovereignty. And they learn by watching that fucker over there that they love. Demonstrate it in real time. Become their apprentice. You marry your favorite teacher in the domain that you most need to develop. And then the other person, the I-centric person, the one who's good at meing, has to become an apprentice and learn how to develop literally empathy algorithms. I teach my husband empathy algorithms because it's not native to him. And I teach him the structures of empathy, how to model another person's experience in a way that wasn't native to him. And you know what he teaches me? How to self. He teaches me algorithms of how when there's 5 people in a room and they all want to do something different, how to not go crazy, but to close my eyes, look into my third eye, and see scripture falling from the heavens, like at the beginning of Star Wars, to see what I want.
What do I want to do?
And I started doing it, and it fucking works.
Yeah.
And now I know why he always knows what he wants. But I never knew how to do it before. And I asked him, how do I not let another person's anger or frustration, yelling at me or upset with me, impact me? How come when I'm frustrated with you, you're unfazed, but when you're frustrated with me, I fucking lose my shit? And he goes, just put up a plexiglass shield. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, imagine a plexiglass shield between you and me. It's invisible, made of the same material that Wonder Woman's invisible plane is made of.
Oh my gosh.
And then when I yell at you or say mean things, just imagine it hitting the shield and falling. And you can have sound effects too. Ping. And I literally put the plexiglass shield up whenever he loses his shit, and I stay over here safe and happy. I listen to what he says. I listen to the content, but the energetics and the truth of it does not get to me anymore. But he had to teach it to me.
Yeah.
So I teach him how to do empathy. He teaches me how to be separate. Basically, we're co-teaching each other. The 2 requirements for a true love relationship is the ability to integrate and differentiate. Integrate and differentiate. Codependence is the inability to move between them. You need both.
Yes.
And if you've ever braided hair, a ponytail, you have to take the hair and divide it into 3 strips. And the cleaner and more differentiated those 3 strips, the more exquisite the braid when you integrate.
And the more it looks like one piece.
And that's what coupledom is, learning to be together and then separate. I think of the organism of the us as an entity, and it breathes. It inhales. That's when you're together, gazing into each other's eyes, having the best sex, can't leave each other in bed all day. Inhale, exhale. Fuck off. I need to go for a walk. I need to see my girls. I need to go away for a weekend. Inhale, exhale. And you need to do that daily, weekly, and monthly. Couples need to know, whenever couples are fighting, it's because they didn't exhale in time. They were clinging to the ussy space.
Yes.
And so someone in the relationship has to become guardian of the us, and one has to be guardian of the I.
Even when it's good. And that's something that I think people have a hard time conceptualizing, is that even when it feels really good, the exhale is crucial.
Yes, you can't hold your breath forever.
I hit, and many other people I know hit the upper limits problem.
Exactly.
And then feel ashy, and then we
and
don't
pick a fight to get the exhale.
Or have an accident.
An accident. What do you mean? Like literally, physically?
I mean, that's what they say in conscious loving, that the ways that people bring themselves back down, are having an accident, picking a fight, getting sick. Yeah.
Escape. It's always an escape from the overwhelming ushood. And I literally think of it as an organism, and it needs to inhale and exhale. And if you smother your child all day long, it'll never develop.
Oof.
You need to give it space to run around the playground, and then it'll always come back. And you give it space. It's not a frame people use often, but there's you, your partner, and the relationship. There's 3 entities here, and they all get a vote. And I think if you always optimize for what nourishes the relationship, you will end up finding what nourishes each individual, but that wouldn't be native. Because the relationship is what you're conspiring together to create.
Right.
And very often we get caught up in what do I need and what do you need? And they don't track what does the us need, which is usually something that's emergent and transcendent at the next level of being.
How do you do it in real time? Like, how can you do it now, knowing that you had this phone call from Eben earlier that you were like, why not? What do you, why you bring this up?
So my husband called this morning with some grumble, and I was frustrated, and it left me kind of off for the rest of the day. But I breathed and regulated my nervous system, and I know we're going to get through it. And so I guess what your question is, well, that was a forced exhale. But he's actually away right now, which is a kind of exhale for our relationship. He's actually away. But when you're away, sometimes it's even scarier to have an exhale, like a fight while they're away.
Yeah. I guess what I'm curious about is, you have a naturally built-in exhale in this situation, but you were talking about optimizing for the third entity that is the relationship. Is that optimizing for it? Like, what is that?
So what I did is I got off the phone and I was fucking pissed.
Yeah.
And so I wrote him this text saying, this is what I thought was suboptimal. You didn't check in for my emotional state when you started talking about whatever you had to talk about and get off your chest. And I think that it would have been better if you checked in to see what I had to do today. I had to do this live interview. I have a whole bunch of things I'm running. And the thing he was calling to tell me didn't need to happen in that moment.
Yeah.
And so I gave him feedback about the suboptimality of his timing. I gave him feedback about my emotional state. I said, I'm fucking angry. I actually said I'm 9 out of 10 angry. I said, I love you way more than I'm angry. But I'm angry. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this anger that I have in my body that I think, like, I want to blame you for it. I want to say you ruined my day and you caused it to be shitty, but I'm not going to do that. You may have triggered my anger, but you're not the cause. I call the shots in my emotional state. So what I'm going to do is go away, take some space, go for a walk, breathe myself down, regulate my nervous system, take charge of my emotional state, and do the adult thing, which is create the emotional state that I want to be in for the rest of the day. And bookmark my frustration with my husband, as it will get resolved when the time is right. We are committed to this relationship. We love each other. We're going to work it out.
Unfurling.
But right now, I just need to get back to center. And I did it.
Annie, I do so much blaming. I'm ashamed of how much I blame. And I think it is a legacy of blaming that is, I think it is learned. I do not think it is native to me.
Totally.
I think that I have adopted it as a stance, as a wounded stance from somebody who is just deeply depressed and lonely. And I don't want it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to let it
Plague your life.
Also,
Steal
I was
your
thinking about
aliveness.
like scratch away at my relationships or like leech the beauty from my relationships. I did go to Codependence Anonymous for a year, and a lot of these things that you talk about are reminiscent of ways in which codependent people work to recover. How do I feel? What do I want? Even if I put up a boundary, I might get flack. I can deal with that flack.
Yes.
I own my emotional state. How I'm feeling is not a reflection on my character. If I am jealous, if I'm feeling insecure, that does not mean that I have no self-esteem. If, that...
Yeah, so it's interesting. One of the few things, one of the definitions I learned for integrity is two-part. First, keeping your word, and if you break your word, clean it up. Okay? But the second piece no one talks about, which is always maintaining an empowering stance for yourself. And what that means is, and I literally think this is the purpose of the human imagination, is to always use your intelligence and your imagination to conjure and create a narrative in which what you did, how you are, how you be in this moment
Right.
is the absolute best that could be mustered in this moment, given the resource that you had.
It's the inverse of worry is a bad use of creativity.
Yes,
Right?
exactly.
It's like using your creativity for good in order to adjust your sensation and your emotional response to your reality. Right? Like I missed the plane.
Yeah.
Probably there were going to be issues on that first plane. I now have time to work on the show notes for my most recent episode. I now have a little bit more anticipation, for this first meeting, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
and now I have this whole row to myself in which I can recline and lie down and sleep.
Exactly. I mean, basically, there's all possible realities where things could have not gone wrong, but they're not here.
They didn't happen.
We only have this world with this reality. And so,
to our understanding, our physical understanding right
yeah, and
now,
there may be
right?
other dimensions, but we don't know how to tarry with them yet.
Right. In the improvised Shakespeare company, they always say, this will be a Shakespearean play that has never been performed before and shall never be performed again. Coincidentally, the opening and the closing of the very same play, assuming a linear theory of time. Right?
Yeah.
So
I mean, that's
assuming
true for every moment,
a linear
though.
theory of time.
But that's true for every moment.
Yes.
It's a Shakespearean play. And we are the writer, author, and director. And I want a play
And the
that I like
players.
being in. Yeah, and the players. So creating an empowering stance for yourself requires you to look at this very haunting and difficult phrase. What would have to be true for this to be the right thing that's in existence right now? This situation, the missed plane.
What
the
would have to be
suboptimal-
true for this to be the right thing to be happening in this moment?
Or another way I think of it is the universe is always unfurling perfectly. Just hold that as a fixed point. How do I need to shift my brain, my mindset, and my creativity? If that's the fixed point, the universe is unfurling perfectly. What do I have to believe in order to make that true?
Do you think that's possible in the midst of trauma?
I don't think in the midst of trauma. I think it's
It's
how
later,
you transcend
isn't it?
trauma later. I mean, trauma is a
It's like a rewriting of the circumstances surrounding the traumatic experience.
it can be, but it's really a rewriting of how you look back. The trauma's done. It happened in the past. It's how you relate to the memory that continues to rob you of your aliveness. So it's about changing the way you look back at the trauma so that this current version of you has more power, not less power. And creativity, imagination, and intelligence would be of great service in helping you do that. And this is what therapists do, is they offer resource and narrative and opportunity to reframe what has already happened and cannot be changed so that you relate to it in a way that gives you energy and aliveness rather than robs you.
I remember
power.
my therapist in college when I had a brief stint where they gave the acting students or the students in Tisch in the arts school some amount of free therapy sessions. And I went to see an incredible woman named Rachel Turdy. And she was the perfectly suited therapist for me. She worked with families of people with mental illness. And that was her main focus, which I didn't know when I went to her. She just was synchronistically the perfect therapist for me. And I remember her saying, and I don't remember much, right, about what I shared with her and what she shared with me. But I remember her saying, after I told her all of the things about with my mother, and at that point she was really hard on the guilt, and she had wanted me to go to Brazil, which is where she's from, to live for a year. And she'd been pushing me for years. And I said, no, not now. I have a high school arts program to finish. No, not now. I'm going straight to college. No, not now. I'm finishing my college education,
Good for
getting
you.
my BFA. And then right afterwards, I said, okay, now. And she said, but what if I died while you were there? And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? You know, so
It's that push-pull.
my last year, in my senior year, it was my last year because I only did 3. My third year, I was seeing Rachel, and she said that, and I brought all this history, and then this most recent fresh guilt. And she said, Lila, you are doing amazingly. You are such a well-regulated person to have come from what you've come from, and to be sitting in front of me now the way that you are.
Yeah.
And I was like,
So great.
and I've carried that.
So great.
And then I got another one years later. My mother she was taking lithium. That was the only thing that was really functional for manic depression, or they thought that was functional for manic depression at the time that she started taking medication. She was taking it for years and years and years. It built up to a toxic level in her blood. She had an overdose.
Wow.
She was in the ICU and nonverbal, and I was 24, I think. And I went down to, she lives in Florida actually, and I was living in Portland, Oregon, and I came down to Florida. After I returned from that experience in which I now spoke Portuguese.
Okay.
And when she became verbal again, she only spoke in Portuguese
Wow.
initially, because she was recovering from a trauma and reverted to her initial language. And I was able to see her through getting out of the ICU, going to a regular ward, and then getting out and, you know, going to the bank to make arrangements in case, and becoming her medical proxy. I can't remember the correct term for that. And getting the power of attorney and all these things that I felt, oh my God, I'm too young for this, but I'm the only one. I'm the one. So this is happening. And I came back to Portland and I said, I think maybe I might need some support. And I found the NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, and their support groups, which actually are run by a therapist, I believe. Somebody who's trained in some way is facilitating those groups. They didn't give much feedback, but I was in a group, and it was families of people with mental illness. So it was very broad, right? But it was people who had a schizophrenic daughter, people who had a husband who was suicidal, all these different kinds of experiences, and from different points, reference points in relationships. And they were all older than me by probably 10, 20 years. And I remember saying, I feel like I haven't done enough. I feel I don't know how to handle it. I feel too young for this. I wasn't a good proxy in the hospital. I didn't know how to advocate. And they said, oh my God, you're doing great. I think you're an amazing human being. And to hear that from people who were expressing the same emotional cycles. I didn't think I was going to have anything in common with these people who had a schizophrenic daughter. But they expressed the exact same codependent emotional cycles of guilt and rescuing and persecuting, and you know, those unvirtuous cycles. Yes. And I remember receiving that from them, that they could see that I was strong, and that I was strong because I was openly vulnerable.
Yeah. It takes courage to be transparent. It takes courage to be honest. It takes courage to cry. And I feel like someone who's actually connected to their aliveness lives one thought away from tears at all times.
For horizontal photos in unexpected places and behind-the-scenes videos, like the one I took of Annie's glorious red carpet ocean view, follow Horizontal with Lila on Instagram. I've been getting really into Instagram lately, and I have a cache of colorful photos to share, especially from Miami. If you are in need of the services of a love coach, and really, who isn't, you can commune with all things Annie through AnnieLala.com. Lala is spelled Lalla, AnnieLala.com. This episode was edited by Mr. Chad Michael Snavely, bearded man, father, and podcast impresario. Have a peek through his roster on chadmichael.com. The character illustration and graphic design for my cover art was drawn by Shauna Shea. Look her up on 99 Designs. And my sweet intro music was composed by Alan Markley, Rockstar Father, and Plastic Cannons on Instagram. Book your ticket for 14 rooms now and come Valentine's with us on Thursday night. If you're short on funds but full of enthusiasm, send me a message through horizontalwithlila.com or Instagram to see about a possible volunteer shift. I want everybody to be able to experience an intimate, immersive Valentine's night. Next week's episode, 68, part 2 of my conversation with Annie, will be available to patrons of $5 a month and up. The Patreon tiers will change in the next month or so lock in access to the full Horizontal at the grandfathered rate by becoming a patron now. Patreon.com/horizontalwithlila. Welcome to my newest patrons, Bob and Lee, and so much gratitude to Julene for raising her Patreon pledge. I like you so much. After a luscious trip to Miami, I am feeling turned on by life. I wish you that. And as always, I wish us someone to love, something to do, and something to look forward to. Thank you for becoming horizontal. So you moved here 8 years ago because Evan loves the beach?
I was actually here exploring pussy with Mama Gina on a retreat, and he came along with me and didn't know what to do during the day. So he went around and looked at apartments and found one and fell in love with it. And we'd been living in New York, and so we kept our place in New York, and he decided to get this one. And at the time, it was really cheap, and the tax you save by putting your residence here in Florida actually paid for the whole place.
Oh my God.
So we lived 6 months here and 6 months in New York, and we kept the place. He loves this place. It's very much his style.
Yeah.
Beach and openness and no humans.
She says with slight disdain.
Well, I totally get why he's afraid of humans. I probably would too, given his childhood. And I'm slowly but sure. I mean, he hired me to emancipate him from this delusion that humans are dangerous. And starting with me. So I'm trying to be the least dangerous person on the planet for him, which I think I'm succeeding at.